My chosen object is a key pouch, a small leather pouch that I use to keep my keys in when I'm working in prison. So it's not necessarily a particularly psychological object, but it's an important aspect of my role. It reminds me of the power that I have and hold over some of the individuals that I work with, the prisoners that I sometimes work with. So even though it's a rather practical object, it's quite symbolic as well, because it clearly distinguishes me from the individuals that I'm working with in the prison, who I'm offering psychological therapy to. And one that symbolises this unequal dynamic that necessarily exists between me and the participants or the recipients of the intervention that I'm trying to deliver. Well, my research is based primarily in prison. And so obviously my object is a kind of an everyday element to moving around the prison. The research itself focuses on working with individuals that are currently living in prison that are at risk of ending their life, at risk of suicide. And so my role as a psychologist is to meet with individuals on a regular basis, typically for an hour at a time, for a session, to deliver a psychological therapy. And that usually takes place over a 4-month window. The science comes from evaluating the impact and the efficacy of that psychological intervention. My first interest in psychology came about a little bit later than perhaps might be traditionally expected. So I was working in IT, in computers, up until the age of 26, and then I began to realise that that wasn't really fulfilling my career ambition, and I became increasingly aware of being more interested in why people did what they did. My IT role had taken me into the kind of management end of things, and I began to have more questions around understanding what makes people tick, how to work with individuals in a more productive way. So I kind of got into organisational psychology through that means. And then eventually one thing led to another. I did a few different night classes, did a module with the Open University, and then decided to do a career shift into psychology, went back to school, did my psychology master's conversion course, and I've never looked back since. I've since completed a PhD. I'm now professionally qualified as a clinical psychologist, and I now conduct, as I've said already, research trials looking at psychological therapies in prison. So it's been a real shift away from what I used to do in IT, but one I'm really pleased to have made actually several years ago now. I became a researcher in psychology before I became a clinician in psychology, before I became a clinical psychologist. And so an opportunity for me to use and develop some of my research skills came about soon after I completed my master's in psychology, where I got a job as a research assistant here at Manchester University, working in prisons actually. And that gave me a taste for how I could actually work as a psychologist in some capacity. I really liked that. That took me into pursuing a PhD. But I then also wanted to stretch my wings so that I could actually do clinical research rather than what I would consider to be more kind of basic science research. Very important, very valuable, but I wanted the applied end of research to be what I spent most of my time doing. That required me to have a professional qualification, a clinical psychology doctorate, and since then I've been able to pursue research in a more clinical domain, delivering therapy and interventions.